Welcome. This is Steve Winnick with the American Folklife Center of the Library of Congress. We've been doing the Homegrown Concert Series for many years. During the pandemic of 2020, we shifted focus to doing this series as a video concert series, which we call Homegrown at Home. So now in 2021, we're in our second season of Homegrown at Home concerts. And we were very happy to have with us in this year's series, Hubby Jenkins. Hubby is a great old time and blues musician, does gospel songs as well, living in Brooklyn, and we have him here for an interview. So, Hubby, welcome to the Homegrown at Home interview series.
Thank you. Good to be here. I had fun playing the concert in my backyard, and yeah, look forward to talking to you.
Yeah, that was really fun. So, you are from Brooklyn, I believe, from a New Yorker. So, tell us how you got into music growing up in Brooklyn.
Sure. Well, yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up with two moms. One of my moms is Puerto Rican. My other mom's family is from North Carolina, but she was born and raised in Queens. But with that, I grew up with like a lot of music. So like whenever we had a cookout or a barbecue, just hearing lots of different types of music. On my Puerto Rican side of the family, there was always conga drums, and someone would put a cowbell in my hand, and like probably learning the clave was the first thing I ever did as a kid. Um, and then I started playing saxophone from the age of like 5. I played saxophone from the age of 5 all the way into high school. Um, and I guess that's where I like learned to like read music and play with other people. And I had a really good teacher in middle school, Kevin K. Knutson, who had a very funny sense of humor. All of our permission slips, he would just put KKK on because he thought it was funny. And 11-year-old me thought it was funny too. Um, but just like how to use your ear, he made sure everyone could snap with both hands and play with rhythms and do things like that. And around that time, I kind of like discovered music and stopped watching as much TV and obsessively listened to everything. And back then, CDs were cheap, so I could just like get my allowance or whatever and just spend it all on CDs and one movie at a matinee or something. Um, but yeah, I guess that's most the bulk of my childhood and
Very
music. And
cool.
I guess I grew up like in the late '80s. I have like distinct music memories. Like I remember when
Hmm.
like 36 Chambers of Death by Wu-Tang Clan came out, and like just walking on the streets and you just heard it everywhere, every
Right.
boombox, every car passing, just like things like that, and just amazed me. And one last tangent, but just like um, when I remember being 11 or 12 and our apartment was right on the corner, and I was listening to the radio, 103.5 KTU, that's a dance music station in New York,
Hmm.
and they were playing Rick James' Super Freak. And it's a part where he goes, ha ha ha, like that part of the song. And I'm like, just sitting, like looking out the windows, listening to the radio, and there's this person walking across the street, and they had their headphones in, and they just stopped in the middle of the street and went, like that. And I like, was like, oh snap, we're listening to this. Like, I don't know, like it just blew my 12-year-old mind. Like, oh right, we're all listening to it, and something about that really stuck with me for sure.
Right. No, that's great,
Um,
and yeah, it kind of gives you that feeling of the city and how that's going on all the time. It's a big community, and it's great. It's a great place to live and grow up in many ways. So at some point you took this giant musical stew, right, of everything, and you ended up focusing a little bit on what we would now say was like old time music or folk music, or give it one of those names. So how did that happen?
yeah. In high school, I dropped the saxophone because the music teacher was weird. He was too patriotic for me, actually. And then I started playing cello and viola in the orchestra, classical orchestra, and then started playing bass there. And people were like, "Oh, you can read, the same. It's the same clef or whatever, so you can play this music." And I started playing bass in bands. Getting into, I heard Jimi Hendrix for the first time, and Bob Dylan for the first time, and started getting into playing bass. And I started a band with some friends, and we were just like imitating 60s music. Like we were just all about the 60s. And then we got really into Bob Dylan, and somehow eventually we got our hands on his first record. and
Hmm.
that's basically blues. They're all blues covers. That album. I think he covers like Bucka White on there, and some other stuff. And so I had a good friend who is still a friend of mine, Jonah, whose dad is or I don't know if he still does, but he was a collector of CDs and tapes and records. This is pre-internet now, so
Hmm.
well, not pre-internet, but like the way it is now. So we would like, oh, like I heard of someone named Bucka White. We just go to Jonah's dad's house and like look through the shelves and borrow the CD. And so that
Very
was kind of
cool.
my first intro to a lot of that music. And I now I'm in like post high school. I'm taking my year off from college, which is a couple of decades and counting now. And I threw a party. Like my parents were out of town, and threw like let's just have a few friends over, and it turned into a big old party. And a friend of mine made me a mix CD, and I had a terrible fight with my then girlfriend and kicked everyone out of the party, and put on the mix CD that he had made for me after everyone was gone. And the first track was "Devil Got My Woman Blues" by Skip James, and I was like, I get the blues now entirely for the very first time. And I got a paycheck from the ice cream stand I was working in Bryant Park, and went to
Uh-huh.
Guitar Center and said, turn this into a guitar. And that's how I got my first guitar. And I spent the whole day in the ice cream stand just learning chords. And then I quit like maybe a week or so later and was like, I'm going to play music now. Yeah.
Cool. So that sort of put a guitar in your hands, but you're also now play a whole bunch of other instruments, some of which are things that have become part of the identity of you and some of the bands that you're in, including the banjo. So why don't you talk about how you sort of diversified into other stringed instruments? Because I mean, I know you also play mandolin. You play a lot of stuff. So talk about your instruments a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, that's how the guitar came to me. I think the banjo came next. And is that true? Wow, at my age, it's hard to remember the orders, but like, it was around the time I was living with some musicians in College Point in Queens,
Hmm.
and we would hang out in Washington Square Park a lot. Kind of our connection to the old time music, being New Yorkers, was the West Village and the folk scene of the '50s and '60s, and so that's where we would congregate a lot. And we would meet musicians who would also folkies who would go there, and we just you need a place to crash, and they would just crash at our house. And one day I woke up and was walking in my living room, and I tripped over someone, and I'm like, who are you? And he's like, I'm the Don. I'm like, the Don? No, Dom Flemons. And my roommate had met Dom in Washington Square Park, and that's how we met each other. And I think it was maybe the next year he came past, or maybe later, I don't know. At some point, he came through with a friend, Lydia from, I think she's from Baltimore, D.C., and they were just
Hmm.
traveling together. And she had a banjo, and we were in Washington Square Park, and she's like, "Oh yeah, this is my traveling banjo." And she started showing me how to claw hammer, and I picked it up like in an hour or something, like a stupid quick time. I always tell people it was like the light from heaven shined on me, and it just clicked or bounced or bum diddied. And just a little bit of a tangent too. I'd listen to like Harry Smith folk anthology or whatever, and I would skip like Clarence Ashley and skip a lot of that stuff. I was kind of like, I don't know what that is. I don't really get what's happening there. It's not really. I don't know if that's my music. I don't know what the hell that is. And I was just really like blues focused for a very long time.
Hmm.
And then like reading whatever book. I think I was reading like Birth of the Banjo or Ragged But Right or something, and just like learned that the banjo was a black instrument, and it kind of like blew my mind. 21-year-old hubby, just like and then the banjo, and then this banjo came into my hands, and then I was able to like claw hammer very quickly. And she gave it to me. She's like, "You can just have this banjo."
Wow.
And so that became that. And then I ended up getting a mandolin and doing that to play, blues stuff and just kind of picking with friends. And the Bones actually learned from Michael Baytop at Common Ground on the Hill in Westminster, Maryland, which is, if we
Hmm.
had a lot of time, I could tell you a lot of stories about that. But and uh, and then when I joined Carolina Chocolate Drops, I got a call from their manager who I'd started doing some work with, solo, and he was like, "Hey, do you play the violin?" And I was like, "Not even a little bit." And he's like, "Okay, do you want to be the main banjo player for Carolina Chocolate Drops?" And that really like catapulted my banjo playing for sure.
That's great. Well, let's
You can
talk
imagine
about the
like our
Carolina.
okay, okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about the Carolina Chocolate Drops a little bit, because we've sort of gotten there in your story, and that was a big part of how I met you, but also, so how you first came to the library, but also just your musical career. So let's talk about that. How did you meet up with those folks and start that process?
Sure. How long is this? Can I just ramble like I've been rambling?
Um, well, it's going to go probably close to an hour, so you can
Oh
probably
yeah.
ramble a little bit. We're okay.
All right, we're
Yeah.
good. We're good.
I'll rein it in if I have to, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I give you that power, please.
Thank you.
But yeah, so me getting into the chocolate drops, I guess there's a few things. So like in that time period of like hanging around in the West Village, there was me and some friends found out about a show happening in the back of a Thai restaurant in McDougal Street, and the person running the show was like, "I don't want to do this anymore." So my friend Farrell Foster took it over, and every Wednesday night just started doing a folk show, and we would just invite young people and just like we're playing folk music in the back of this Thai restaurant. There's a show called Roots and Ruckus, which like grew and still happens today. They're actually having their Roots and Ruckus festival this weekend at Jalopy
Cool.
Tavern or Jalopy Theater. But anyway, so I met a lot of people from playing there, and like my first like gigs were playing there every Wednesday, and like and through that I ended up meeting this guy Sam and Karen Duffy, who were a couple, and Sam Duffy was a brother of Tim Duffy, who runs Music Maker Relief Foundation and was the first manager of Carolina Chocolate Drops. So I met him and Dom like within a couple years of each other. And just through like, me being good at playing music and them needing someone handsome and black and talented to fill in after Justin left, I got the call. And I did my little audition and it went great, as you can imagine. And I remember like, they're like, "Okay, we're going to go tour." It was like maybe the fall. They're like, we start in February. Like, great. Like, what's your repertoire? And they're just like, "Oh, no problem." And they just mailed me all of their CDs. Like, that's our repertoire. I was like, okay, cool. And just kind of started going through it. It was the first time I'd really like listen to Joe Thompson and started breaking down his stuff a little bit. And then of course and then in that first year we did 260 days on the road and 200 and some odd shows. So that really like busted my chops and learning more in that way. And I don't know if they already had the kind of tradition of stopping by when they came through DC.
Yeah, the first time we had them in the reading room, you weren't in the group yet, but yeah, so Justin was there actually that first time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so when we went, I was totally amazed. And I remember the first time that we came through because I remember I played Sam Cooke live at the Harlem Square Club in the van on the way there, which I think is one of the greatest albums of all time. And they didn't like it as much. And I was like, these people are weird. And then we got to the reading room. I was like, all right, these people, they're all right. They're all right. And yeah, and I think that was just, it's also a cool thing too of being able to, what's the word I'm looking for? I just like feel like part of the reason why I became, I don't know if I would call myself a researcher, but like became interested in that sort of thing is just, when you're black and you play this music, old time music, you can feel very isolated, especially if you're, I don't know, in New York, but I don't know what it could be like if you're also in the South and like the spaces you go to are very white and people are telling you like, different things about it.
Yeah.
So you just end up reading and wanting to dive into more and just, get to the truth of things. And so that was kind of the impetus for me. And so when we're, in an all black string band and our mission is to like, reinsert black people into the narrative of American music. And then, there's this wonderful place that we could just walk into and like hear it and also hear like, "Oh, you've heard that recording, but have you heard this one before?" Or like, I don't know, I've never heard Skip James curse before or whatever. I'm making stuff up. But like that just seemed very magical to me. Yeah, it's like Hogwarts or something like that. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say that because one of the things that always comes to my mind is people really associate the blues with just a guy with a guitar. Um, but if you come to our archive and you listen to those first Muddy Waters recordings, for example, he's playing guitar, but there's a mandolin and there's a fiddle, and it's basically string band music with Muddy singing and playing guitar. And people have kind of erased black people from the string band tradition in their minds, but there were always African American string bands, and Carolina Chocolate Drops, is a great example of that tradition. Did you meet any of the old timers from other string bands, other African American string bands, as a member of the Chocolate Drops?
Did I meet any other members of African American string bands? I don't know. I think like through Music Maker, I was able to meet. They had a big, heavy focus on blues, so I met a lot of older
Yeah,
blues musicians there. In my life, I mean, no, I would say probably not. Without the Chocolate Drops, I was able to spend time with people like John Cohen of New Lesson
right.
Ramblers and stuff like that. But no, I don't think so. Oh, and I guess I met what was it called? I went to the second Black Banjo gathering in Boone, North Carolina, and there I met like Joe Thompson for the first time.
Yeah,
I think I met Otis Taylor for the first time. Yeah, sorry, I'm
cool.
I'm
So
blanking on that
just
one.
so just a couple of folks, but yeah, but I mean, it just speaks to what you were saying that the tradition, um, there was kind of a hiatus, right? So that most of the folks who
Yeah,
played in that tradition were very old by the time you were getting into the scene, and so yeah, and
for
so it
sure.
was you. That speaks to the isolation that you were talking about, right? As a black person trying to do this music, and you find that your antecedents are either super old or they're white. So it's
Right.
you know a
Yeah, for
dilemma
sure.
that you found yourself in. Yeah, well, one thing that I've heard you talk about before, and you might want to mention it now, is the Black Banjo Reclamation Project, um, on this same topic.
I guess it's the Banjo Reclamation Project is in California, in the Bay Area, in Oakland, probably. I'm going to say it's in
Mhm.
Oakland. Hannah Mavry is running it, and it's just project of getting they're getting money and getting instruments together and being able to take banjos and put them into the hands of black and brown kids and this the banjo reclamation is just such a very strong name, but you know the power. Let me distill my emotions. When I started playing the banjo, when I started touring with Chocolate Drops, and we would play shows and say, the banjo is a black instrument, and at that time, I think that would be like the most, radical we would get with what we talked about, And still, after shows, people would be like, "That's a lie. My granddaddy played the banjo." Like, boy, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, people would get aggressive, like upset, like very mad about it.
That's fun.
And so it becomes like also like just this denial of history, right? It's a denial of history, but it's a denial of my history. It's a denial of me. It's a denial of my ancestors. It's a denial of their importance, but like by proxy my importance as an American, right? To say like, no, you had nothing to do with the thing that you love. Like, this is ours too. Fuck you. And so I'll try not to curse that much, New Yorker over here. So I'm like, you know to be, so that became very important or very emboldening to be like, no, banjo's a black instrument. You're going to deal with it, and then you're also going to deal with an hour and a half of black people just playing banjo at you,
Yeah.
and not to make it us versus them, but just that pride of doing it, right? And so when you have this thing like this banjo reclamation project, or just like when I go to schools, or when we used to go to schools as a band, looking at kids and saying like, this is yours too, right? Like, you are not a visitor here. You are not a guest here. Like, this is also yours. This country is also you. Like, you are part of cultivating this thing. And so I just think it's a very beautiful project and very important. You know.
Cool. Well, thanks for talking about it a little bit. Um, to go back to the Chocolate Drop, so you joined this band. You said you did this first massive tour, 200 plus dates in your first year, and then you stayed with them for some years. So talk a little bit about the dynamics of that band and some of the great people you were able to play with in the band?
Sure. I guess, over the years of Carolina Chocolate Drops, I won't go too deep. Oh, you meant musical dynamics, not band dynamics, obviously.
Yeah. Musical
But
dynamics.
like,
Sorry.
I've been watching that Beatles documentary,
Yeah.
and boy, I can just relate to so. There's one part where Paul looks to George and he goes, "Look, you can play it slow or you can play it good." And I was like, "Oh, I've been in that I've been in that room before." But when I first joined Chocolate Drops, it was me, Rhiannon, Dom, and Adam Matta, the human beatbox machine, and just right there, you can see a lot of what we were doing was taking different traditions, different folk traditions. I include hip hop as a folk tradition, but that's maybe another video we could make. But like, and didn't you guys just did the hip hop? Anyway, I'm on a tangent. The coffee's gonna go away. I'm gonna bring the water over here. But just combining these different traditions and just seeing how that works. Being able to just boom, Sourwood Mountain, straight. We're old timey. We can bring it to you with a little bluegrass flavor. But we could also play for you. Rhiannon's going to do some Gaelic lilting. Adam's going to do a beat on the human machine, with his mouth. Dom's going to play a giant bass drum in the style of fife and drum, and I'm going to play bones in the style of madness. And that becomes all these different traditions coming together. So that was always kind of a cool aspect of playing. And so that we had that, and then we got to play with Layla McCalla, Malcolm Parson, my brother from another mother, Rowan Corbett. I think that's all the Carolina Chocolate Drops before we get into Rhiannon Giddens band. And it's funny, we played the Grand Ole Opry a couple of times, and I forget, like, it's like the second time we played there because Malcolm was with us at this point. And there was a guard there who was telling us that, like, there were maybe like 6 black people who had ever performed at the Grand Ole Opry. And it was like Charlie Pride, Ray Charles, D. Ford Bailey, James Brown, the guy from Hootie and the Blowfish, and then like 8 people from Carolina Chocolate Drop. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I was like, that's pretty. There's something amazing about that. But also Grand Ole Opry get it together, but also just, amazing. And so that was just the beauty of that. And just traveling around and seeing people react positively to the music, being able to create and combine these things. And then over time, like the first couple of years, it's like the banjo's a black instrument, the banjo's a black instrument. And then eventually getting questions like, what are the ramifications of an all black string band playing this music in America today? Like, okay, we're getting there. Like, how's this music relate to like what happened to Freddie Gray last week? Like, yes, okay, now we're getting there, So it was interesting. I don't know, I'm just very grateful for have that journey and have that band during that time, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess through the success of the band, you were able to play in spaces that, as you say, have been typically dominated by white people. The Opry being an obvious example, but just the whole bluegrass scene, the whole kind of Americana scene, the image that we have within those. Those spaces is typically a bunch of white people. So what was it like to be that band that was able to, go in there and have everyone go, whoa, these guys are amazing?
Across the board, like just generally, it was great. And it was just great to like be performed for people to be like, whoa, you just knocked my socks off, or whoa, you just blew my mind. Excuse me. It's also work, it could be hard because sometimes you have to break the ice or break through to people sometimes, and people will quickly put up their guard if, like we were saying before, something as simple as the banjo's a black instrument, that can put people on guard. And then you also have things like when people get too comfortable. One of my first festivals I ever played, this is before Chocolate Drops, but I played at Shakori Hills Festival in North Carolina. And at one night I was hanging out around around a fire playing music with all these musicians and having a great time. And then all of a sudden, like, they start dropping N-bombs and telling nigger jokes, and I'm just like, like they told me about the South, and so I just had to deal with it, I dealt with it by like telling the worst nigger joke that I know, and it made everyone stop. But I was young and drunk on moonshine for the first time. But like, if you get older, you also like deal with things where people are calling you boy or talking to you in a certain way that you have to like, oh yeah, assert yourself and like constantly have to not defend. I think assert's the word in these spaces. But then other times it's just welcoming and you get to play music that you freaking love with people who are really good at it, So it's a mixed bag, I guess. But now I think, I don't know, that's all turning around.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned, that's all the Chocolate Drops before it became Rhiannon Giddens Band, before we moved into that phase. So talk about working with Rhiannon as the Rhiannon Giddens Band.
Yeah, I mean, that was, how did that even start? I guess like T-Bone Burnett was a big part of that, and we did some stuff for that movie, the Llewyn Davis movie. But that's when we like, we got some white folks in the band, Jason Cipher and Jamie Dick on drums, Jason on bass, whose birthday is coming up in a couple days. And just so it became like, bigger and more rockish. Your boy Hubby Jenkins started playing electric guitar. I'd never even owned an electric guitar until this band. And just people would talk to me like, you don't know how to set an amp? And I was like, So I learned about that kind of stuff and reverb and just loving it. You could just hit one note and then just walk away from the guitar if you want. And so that was pretty raucous. And then I think we started getting, I don't know, we started getting more shows. We did David Letterman. This is where I got this cup from, was like Rhiannon Giddens. And so like, we're able to incorporate these sounds, and I think we're reaching out to more people. And yeah, I went traveling further around the world. And I'd say like even, talking about like audiences and spaces, like we started noticing more POC showing up to shows, like especially like in New York or DC or in California. I remember we played Atlanta and like people from Afropunk came to check it out, and it was just like, whoa, like that was not happening when we were Sourwood Mountain. But yeah, I guess that would, I don't know if you have more specific questions, but I think that's it in a nutshell.
Sounds good. Well, it might make sense to talk about your kind of solo work as well, particularly just before and during the pandemic. What have you been focusing on lately, I guess is the question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, before the pandemic, it was kind of continuing the work of the Chocolate Drops and just like using the music to kind of tell my interpretations of not interpretations of history is a bad thing. Let's go back 3, 2, 1. But just my understandings of history and just putting a scope to it. So for a long time, I was doing a show of like, why are black people not associated with the banjo, the instrument that they created? Like, what sort of factors could contribute to that? And so I could do like an hour and a half of just like, we can talk about blackface minstrelsy. We can talk about the record industry. We can talk about the Great Migration. We can talk about all these things that like, now we get to this time where we don't associate black people as much with the instrument. And then my next obsession became spirituals and gospel, which I'm still on. I think what I need to do is to make like a record. Like once I make my spirituals gospel album, it'll be like closing the chapter, and then move on to my next thing, which I'm not 100% sure what it'll be yet. I've been working a lot on Joseph Spence right now and breaking down his guitar playing. And I have a big dream or I had a dream anyway, of playing it in a band, like having a fiddle and bass and trying to turn his style of music, I don't know what you would call it, like Caribbean blues, gospel, jazz,
Yeah.
But I want to maybe turn it into a band thing. And that's, copyright Hubby Jenkins 2021. But there's that. I don't know. I just have many things percolating. I'm thinking about double entendre stuff. So also thinking about just like, I mean, it's hard to do work songs and to do prison songs, but I just wondered like, just all those like great recordings, that Lomax's did, like going into prisons and stuff like that. Of like, what would that experience be like today? Like, what is the music now? I know a lot of it is hip hop, and a lot of people, which I love, and like I said earlier, consider like a folk art. So like, I don't know, someday someone might give me money to try and do that. And anyway, I'm telling you all my ideas, but stuff like this, they're
Yeah,
percolating.
I mean that would be cool to take that hip hop tradition that's there, in prisons as well as other places, and try to sort of infuse it with some of the older styles of music, some of the the banjo stuff, the stuff that you play in other contexts, and sort of marry those traditions. That would be very cool.
For sure, but also to
So
even just look at it in the same way, right? Because like if I, I don't know, what's one you can think of, like No More Cane on the Brasses or something like that, right? Like, I don't know why I picked that one, but if I hear something today where someone's got some song in there that's about having to do the rodeo in Angola, or having to, the chance to get free, or doing license plates or whatever. It's that same context. So you're able to kind of connect them in that way. And I think that's a part of like what I do musically as well. So it's like, I might play when Mean Old Frisco by Mississippi Fred McDowell. It's not about the Great Migration, but it perfectly fits it. So I can use it
yeah.
in that way to like describe it. So I think that would be not necessarily that I would want to put a banjo under what's happening, but to really look at it as now. And then, we have this whole history and this whole musical library, you especially, that we can reference to say, this is what this is how this stacks up, and, or
Yeah.
is connected,
And
or is part of the stream.
yeah, and one of the interesting things is that even though people kind of associate hip hop per se with the, like you said, the 80s and that great era, that, that tradition, that rapping tradition goes back as long as any of these other traditions we're talking about. And there's, field recordings of that as well. So just to look at it as its own thing is another, I think, important part of talking about, American history and Black American history particularly. So yeah, do all those projects. That would be cool.
Yes, sir. I gotta go.
Yeah. Right.
And there's also
So yeah,
Toast, which I think I first heard over like I feel like I have a memory of you playing for me like a Hitler toast or something like that.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we have a
And I
lot of
just
toasts. Yeah,
and
yeah,
I don't know what you
and
do
those
with them.
things
I
are.
remember I got up. Go ahead.
I was gonna say those things are basically rap. Early, if you look at the very early hip hop, there was a lot of those kinds of stories being told within the raps as well. So,
Oh,
but
for
you were gonna
sure.
say
And then you
something.
have stuff like what's that record? Six Boys in Danger or something like that. Six.
Oh, I'm
It's a
not sure the one
Smithsonian
you
record.
mean.
It's like the Six Boys in Trouble, and um, it's like a bunch of kids in New York, and they're playing like I don't know what they're playing, maybe like buckets or something, and they're telling
Yeah, yeah.
stories like I'm so hungry or something like that. But and it's like in the same tradition, Six Boys in Danger on the Streets or something like that. Anyway, I could go on, and I remember trying to do some toast, and I think I picked the wrong toast because some of them can go off the rails really quickly, and people are not ready for that kind of raunchiness necessarily at
That's
an
true.
old timey folk show. It surprises them.
Cool. Well, you can keep working on integrating some of that stuff into the show, but like you say, it can be a challenge to put all these things into one audience. And I guess that's one of the issues that you're always going to have is the audience question. And sort of emerging from the pandemic, what are you finding in terms of finding an audience again?
It's been a little finding an audience again. I'm still doing things online, which is okay. This year has been a little bit tougher. Some plans that I made got canceled by second waves in areas, or third waves at this point. Even Omicron is messing with some of my plans for next year already. But when I do go out, and also, going out too, people are a little bit hesitant still to be
Right.
indoors, for 2 hours or whatever it's going to be. But when I do play, I was in Rhode Island this weekend, and people came and they were happy and like appreciative and like glad to be out. And I miss it. It's weird to play a song and then finish, and you're just staring at yourself silently in your apartment or whatever. So I really do miss it, and it's coming back. People need live music, and
Yeah,
it's gonna be all right.
it always will come back. Uh, One of the great things about your concert for us, that you did in your backyard, was when your neighbor got in on the act. Like, you can't you can't escape entertaining people when you do stuff as great as the music that you do, hubby. So
Thanks, man.
yeah. So even
Yeah, and
even
that guy
hiding
too.
out.
Oh yeah, that. Well, I guess I wish you guys could have seen it. It's New York, so it's like all the backyard. In the summertime, it's a beautiful scene. Two people have pools and they're splashing. Everyone's music is competing. You smell 5 different barbecues. It's one of the things I love about. I'm a city mouse or town mouse. But yeah, to this day, like every time I see the guy, he goes, "My man, mandolin." I keep telling him it's a banjo. But yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, well, that's kind of an interesting question too. You are, as you say, a city mouse, and yet a lot of the music that you play has these associations with rurality, with the rural world. How do you negotiate that difference or that distance?
I how do I? I think like as I got older, it might have affected like some of my song choices. Like I think I definitely dropped saying "lordy" at a certain point. Stuff like that. And then just when I'm in the country, I can hang. I can hang in the country. I can do. But I just can't live there. That's the only thing. It's just like just can't live there. But for me, like the music is country music, but it's also part of this bigger thread. So I feel like I can, be my Yankee city self and still respect and honor the music enough that country folks, they give me proper. So it's all good.
So we often kind of end these interviews by asking the person being interviewed, what message do you want to convey in this interview? What would you most like to tell audiences at the Library of Congress?
Oh wow. The most. I always know that this type of question is coming, and I'm never fully prepared. I think that the importance of knowing your history and not just your personal history, your country's history, the history of the things that you're interested in, and love. It cannot be understated how important that is to know it. And when you know it, for me, understanding, this music and the history around it has allowed me to dig deeper into American history, which has allowed me to feel stronger as a person, as a citizen of America and the world, as a black man. It has just done all these things for me that makes it harder for me to, I don't know, put down someone else or oppress someone else or call someone a liar I don't know. It makes it harder for me to do all of these things. And so I just think that, dig into the roots of what you love and like do it honestly and openly, and the whole world will open up to you and it'll be a better place. Something like that.
Well, that's a great message to close an interview with. So thank you so much, Hubby Jenkins. We should say that as a member of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, Hubby has played at the library, but he also performed in the 2021 Homegrown at Home concert series. You can find that video on our website. And Hubby's also joined us in the reading room as a researcher, and we hope that you'll come back and listen to our recordings more, even though so many of them are online, that you can listen to them there too. So, Hubby Jenkins, welcome back to our concert series, and thank you so much for doing this interview.
Anytime, Steve. I'm glad we got to talk.